Christians, life imprisonment, women and modesty. Good morning. I'm Nicky Campbell. Welcome to the Big Questions. Today we're live from the Bishop Stortford High School in Hertfordshire. I welcome everyone to the Big Questions this morning. Thank you very much for coming. Now, this week, the Home Secretary announced Britain would provide refuge for around 500 of the most vulnerable victims of the war in Syria. Germany has already pledged to take 11,000 Syrian refugees under the UNHCR scheme. So far, 2.5 million people have taken refuge in camps in Jordan, Turkey and Lebanon. Now, some politicians, like Nigel Farage of UKIP and Sir Gerald Howarth of the Conservatives, have called for Britain to do more, especially for, quote, fellow Christians. Is it Britain's duty to give refuge to Syrian Christians? Alison Ruoff, why do you think Christians should be prioritised?
Well, because there's really nowhere else for them to go. In the Middle East, it's very, very difficult. Many have gone to different countries closer to Syria, but there's still persecution. And so I believe we're still a Christian country. The majority of people, still a majority, say that we are a Christian country in Great Britain. And therefore, I think we have a duty to take some of these Syrians, and I would say, let us prioritise Christians, because they're having such a really hard time in terms of persecution.
But everyone's having a hard time.
Exactly. Of course they are, but Christians are in the middle of it, and you've got...
everyone's in the middle of it.
Well, there are...
Is prioritising Christians, is that a Christian thing to do?
It is in this situation because they are so persecuted throughout the Middle East. And where you've had dictators in the various countries, Iraq, Egypt, and so on, Tunisia, and where they've fallen and been deposed, therefore the Christians are then attacked big time. Where the dictators have been in power, providing the Christians have kept their heads down, they've been safe. And you've had many Christians go from Iraq to Syria, for example. And now the rise in persecution in Iraq is much, much higher. And Christianity has been slowly wiped out, well, actually quite fast now, in the Middle East. And that's the birthplace of Jesus. And you think, what is going on there that it's so sad for Christians to have this awful battle of being between particularly Shias and Sunni Muslims who are fighting each other. And so the Christians are getting the worst of it.
Measure of agreement there. Reverend Nadim, why not?
I'm originally from Syria, and of course I agree that the Christians are having terrible time. We have been, for the first time for centuries, we are being killed just because we are Christians.
It's appalling. There's beheadings, there's torture,
beheading with
targeted.
swords in the 21st century. But if we ask Jesus Christ now here, would you like your people to be prioritized and being out of the trouble? He would say no, because the suffering, although that I highlight, because I'm a priest, I highlight the suffering of the Christians, but the suffering of the Christians are not in any way more important than the suffering of any Syrian. Every Syrian is suffering, and including Christians, and they should not be prioritized, and they should not be displaced from their home. You said, lady, that
Alison,
that Christians are leaving the Middle East. So we need to support Christians to stay in the Middle East.
Oh, that's right.
That's what now suddenly this country remembers that the country is a Christian country. I'm sorry, this country is not a Christian country. It's a secular country with some people, when they are desperate for an answer, they say, I'm an Anglican. Anglican, it equal to nothing. So I lived here for 16 years, and I know we need to support the Christians to be there.
Alison Ruoff, and we're talking, of course, about Syriac Orthodox, Armenian Orthodox,
indeed,
Greek Orthodox people, but you still maintain they should have
Well, we're only
priority.
talking a matter of 500, and that's tiny. It's just a drop in the ocean. Of course, everybody is suffering in Syria. It's a nightmare what's going on. But I think as the Christians are being so targeted, if we're going to have any, then they can at least feel safe in this country.
Can I just stop you for 1 second? We have a technical problem at the moment, but we're carrying on with sound, but it sounds great on the radio. Sorry, Alison, carry on.
It's all right. I've forgotten what I was saying, but that's called the age. No, so I do think, as it's such a small number, then we can prioritise. And we're only talking about women and children in particular who've had such a bad time. So you can...
So women and children who are not Christian, Sunni Muslims or Shia Muslims, but Christian women and children should have priority over them.
500. What difference does 500 make to millions of people, really?
So David, David.
I work for a charity called Refugee Action. We spent 30 years resettling refugees in this country. We did it with Vietnamese people, with Kosovans, with Bosnians, and we resettle about 500 people a year from around the world. The idea that any of those people should be prioritised because of what they do or don't believe to is just appalling, actually.
It's appalling, but...
I wonder if I could just finish the point,
because
the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees will be responsible for identifying people. The government set who the groups are going to be. It is women and children at risk, and it is victims of torture. I can't believe, as a nation, we want to prioritise women and children. What we're saying to a woman or a child, I'm sorry, we're not going to prioritise you because you're at risk, but because you have the wrong faith. That just doesn't resonate with our British values.
Yeah. Lisa Pearce, by the way, I'm delighted to say we're now back in vision. But apologies to viewers, and apologies to you, Alison, for having interrupted you to a minute. Lisa Pearce from Open Doors, you've seen what's happening. You're seeing what's happening to Christians across the Middle East. Give us an idea.
So right across the Middle East, I mean, it's certainly true that they are under enormous pressure. The Syrian minority is the second largest Christian minority in the Middle East after the minority in Egypt, and we've probably all seen on the news what has been happening fairly systematically to particularly the Egyptian Coptic Church in Iran. In Iraq, these are the lands in which the Bible was set. Iran and Iraq, much of the Old Testament took place since the 90s.
The road to Damascus.
At the road to Damascus, where Paul became a Christian a few years after Jesus' death, is in Syria. These are the homelands of Christianity. This is not a Western religion. Here is not the heartland of Christianity. It is in those nations where they are being pushed out. In Iraq, for example, in the 90s, there were 1.5 million Christians. Through systematic persecution, they are now down to about 330,000. I spoke to an Iraqi church leader a couple of weeks ago, and he said, you know, on the upside, the government has now increased the number of soldiers that it sends to put outside our church to ensure that we're not attacked while we worship. When that's the upside of Christianity in the Middle East, there is something wrong. But I do agree with Father Nadim that as Christians, our two key commandments are to love God with our heart, mind and strength, and to love our neighbour. And Jesus made it clear that our neighbour is anyone in need. Now, on top of that, though, I would say that we, in Syria in particular, we need to be careful to make sure that Christians get the same level of support that we would want everyone else to have. You don't find the Christians in the refugee camps because both culturally they would rather live in a broken down building or on a patch of land or in a shed than go to a camp. Secondly, they feel fear. And there is a lot of evidence and a lot of anecdotal evidence, and certainly a number of people I've met to as refugees and spoke to in Lebanon last year were saying that they didn't want to register as refugees because they have fear of reprisal from Assad should he retain power. So we need to be intentional in seeking them out.
In the refugee, they don't go... absolutely right. Culturally speaking, and from the religious background, we do not, in Syria or in the Middle East, we do not like to be in a refugee status or go to camps and live in tents. What we do is we absorb that into our families, churches, monasteries, convents, and because of that, I urge everybody to help us. Also, I'm the director of the Awareness Foundation, and we have projects there to help Christians in the Middle East to stay in the Middle East and play their role.
Absolutely.
Tim Aker from UKIP, we know what your leader Nigel Farage has said about this, and I mentioned Gerald Howarth from the Conservatives as well. Make the case, if you would, because I know it's what you believe, for prioritising Christians.
Well, as Alison said, this is still a Christian country. People are, if asked with what faith people will identify with, it's Christianity. And it's always been the British thing to do, to offer safe haven. You know, we wouldn't have this kerfuffle if we'd actually controlled our borders. But we say that we should offer... It's an absolute crisis what's going on there that would be made even worse if Cameron had had his way and started bombing Syria. And UKIP was the first party
Away
to
from
say
that,
no
if you
bombing
would,
of Syria.
a debate that we have had before and we will have again, why prioritise a particular religious group?
Well, has been evidence that there's incredible persecution going on out there, and we're the first ones to say that we should be a safe haven for the most persecuted, the people in genuine fear of their lives, and there's the evidence there.
Shia.
But there are other states out there that the Muslims can integrate into better, you know, Jordan, Turkey and so on. And we're saying as a Christian country they can be better integrated.
You can't possibly be suggesting that a Muslim couldn't integrate into our society as well as a Christian. The solution to religious discrimination in Syria is not to discriminate religiously in the United Kingdom. You don't solve religious discrimination in one country by discriminating in another, do you?
We're talking about 500 people.
Yeah.
Any audience? Yes, lady there, I saw you had your hand up earlier on.
Yes.
Perhaps when we lost pictures, but now's your
Yeah,
chance.
no, absolutely. I'm actually an employment lawyer,
Yeah.
and I work every day on looking at issues of discrimination in the workplace. And I have to say, I'm actually quite alarmed that anyone can hold a view like this, particularly people that are magistrates, that are leaders.
Former magistrate, but yes.
And so, I mean, it's fundamentally unethical to differentiate on the grounds of religion. If I were to put it to you that we are only, for example, going to take black people from a certain country, or we are only going to take people of a particular sex, how would you feel about that? Because it's no different. These are very personal traits that relate to individuals, like their sex, their race, their colour. Their religious belief should not be differentiated in that way.
Alison, I want to just explore with you in a minute.
If those people that you've just mentioned, black people, different races, whatever, were the most targeted in that place, then I would take them. And it doesn't matter. We've got to look after the most persecuted. And it's a small chance, a small opportunity to do what is really right and to care for Christian people.
For example...
Because nobody else will.
Sarah.
There's a family, for instance, to give you an example, it's not just about the beliefs they hold, it's the danger they're in.
That's right.
It's the danger they're in. If you read the Age of the Church in Need website, ACN, you can see them. They are living in
disproportionate danger.
Yes.
Disproportionate. For example, a Syrian family moved to Jordan, and during Easter time, you know, they had death threats saying, you know, you move away or we'll kill you like your Christ was killed. That is danger.
That's right.
And I suppose as well...
Vicky Beeching.
I suppose as well...
Hang on, Vicky Beeching. Sorry, Eunice. Vicky.
I think it makes me uncomfortable to hear Alison basing this premise on the Christian faith. As a Christian as well, I would say the gospel that I read is actually all about welcoming in the unexpected person, the outsider, that God says the least expected people are welcome. So for us to start picking and choosing, we want people just like us, actually makes me really unsettled on the basis of Christian faith. Secondly, the point I would make is I don't think this is a Christian country anymore. If you actually look at recent YouGov polls and statistics, it's actually a very mixed country, and I don't think we have the right as Christians to claim it as a Christian nation.
Well, YouGov 50. Sorry. Just I've got a figure here. I thought somebody might say that, so I wrote it down. Recent YouGov poll: 56% of people believe this is a Christian country.
But I would go by church attendance. If you look at that, it's a very, very different statistic of people actually practicing the faith.
I think there's two really important issues here. One is I think we have to trust the experts on the ground in Syria. 500 people is a drop in the ocean. It's a very important drop in the ocean, but because it's such a small amount of people, it really does need to be got right. And if you talk to the UNHCR, they would say, how do you choose? But they would say that if you they would say if you target a program like this towards Christians, you actually put more Christians at risk. They'd be very worried about doing such a thing because it raises the profile of that group in the area. So the experts on the ground would say this would be the wrong thing to say.
Christian leaders are not pro prioritizing Christians. If you ask patriarchs or bishops from Syria, they would say, do not prioritize Christians, because that would even put us in greater danger, because we are labeled anyway agents of the West. So we don't want the West to care for us in this way. We want the West to care for us by supporting us where we are, not to take us away from where we are.
There's an interesting sort of concept, Alison, and I want as well to speak to you, Tim, in a second. The concept is almost a sort of reflection of the Muslim Ummah. You have an idea of the kind of Christian brotherhood, sisterhood, Christian community across the nation, whereby people within that should have special care. That seems to be what you're saying.
No, not really. There comes a point when Christians go on turning the other cheek, time after time after time. And I think there comes a point when we actually say, stop, enough is enough. And as I say, 500 is just so tiny. So if we're going to have people who have been so badly treated and so hurt and damaged, let's look after these people for once. We never look after them normally.
Lady back there, yes, I think you've got the microphone. Good morning.
Good morning. I actually think we should be pretty ashamed of ourselves for only taking 500.
I agree.
Germany are taking 10, 11,000. Your leader, Tim, has spoken about the potential, we should think about the social impact, his words. Do you think the social impact would be, there would be easier integration for Christians coming, Alison's nodding at that and agreeing with, than there would be with Sunni and Shia Muslims? Do you think
so. I mean, we've got a problem that's been long coming in this country.
We're talking about Armenian Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, Syriac Orthodox. They're not going to be joining Alison on the Synod of the Church of England.
Not yet, but they might.
Well, they might.
Yeah. Why should they?
Why shouldn't they?
Why should they? Why don't we respect their identity as Christians, who they are? Why should I ask an Orthodox to become Anglican in order to be proper Christian?
I'm not asking them to become Anglican.
So you said, why not joining the Synod? I don't want them to join the Synod.
All of these numbers are on a tiny scale. If we're talking about how to help the church in Syria, we need to be concerned about the fact that Geneva II is happening at the moment.
Yes.
Looking at the future of Syria, the Christian population of Syria is 8 to 10%. There is no Christian representation at Geneva II. We, as Open Doors, took a petition of over 300,000 concerned people to the UN and met with all 5 of the permanent missions just before Christmas. All of them acknowledged that the church wasn't there, that they weren't represented. They said, we don't know what to do about it. That's not good enough. The UK plays a key role on the Security Council. We should be putting more energy into ensuring that a Christian voice is at the table when looking at what the future of Syria is like.
So it's not disproportionate representation, it's fair representation.
And secondly, our aid is distributed through the UN. Sorry,
Lisa, there is a political also a point we have to highlight here. We're talking about persecution and danger for Christians.
Yeah.
Who created that? The West aided the Al-Qaeda to be in Syria. This double standard of the West. On one hand, the Al-Qaeda is a terrorist organization. On the other hand, Al-Qaeda, it's okay in Syria because Al-Qaeda is fighting Al-Assad.
Okay, I want to ask one more question of Alison, who kicked us off, and if I may, I'd like to make the last point. Bishop Nazir Ali and George Carey and others, we've heard this line of thought, believe that Christians in this country are persecuted. When you
I wouldn't say they're persecuted, I'd say they're marginalised.
Words that have been used.
Yeah. Well, it's verging.
Do you condemn those words?
No, because I think it's...
When we look at Syria, do you not condemn the words used by Christians in this country being persecuted? Does it not rather cheapen the term?
I don't think Christians are being necessarily persecuted in this country, but its marginalisation is becoming more and more, which ultimately will lead to persecution if it's allowed to go on. But...
what will happen?
Well, we'll become anything but a Christian country.
But that's not persecution.
No, it's a case of it's a case of they're constantly that you can say anything about Christians, you can mock God as much as you like in this country, say something about Allah, Islam, and you've got the biggest row possible.
Next week. There's been a bit of a word earlier on. There's been a bit of a kerfuffle this week about something that happened on this programme a couple of weeks ago. I don't know if you've been watching the news, but we're doing religion and humour and God next week. So
right, I'll have to come back.
No. You're right. It's never too soon for you, Alison. Thank you all very much indeed. We'll have to leave it there. We have to leave it there. But listen, if you've got something to say about that debate, log on to bbc.co.uk/thebigquestions and follow the link to where you can join in the discussion online, or indeed contribute on Twitter. And we're also debating live this morning from Bishop Stortford, should some life sentences be for life, and should women dress modestly? So get tweeting or emailing on those topics now, or send us any other ideas and thoughts you may have about the programme. Well, last summer, the European Court of Human Rights ruled that